back into Mark. It's been a while. This was supposed to take place in May. The pandemic, we're in the middle of that shutdown. Well, actually, we started meeting again on May 5th, I believe it was. But everything had been put back, so we resumed where we left off. And gosh, December, almost the end of December, and we're back in Mark. So before we really, well, I want to read it, but then we want to back up a little bit. Mark 13, 1 through 8. And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." As he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things are about to be accomplished?" And Jesus began to say to them, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. And when you hear wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginnings of the birth pains." When I saw that I got to do Mark 13, I was really, really excited about it, because there's just so much prophecy in here, and so much misunderstanding about some of it. Well, here's an opportunity to correct some of the dispensational teaching and things like that. But then I got brought back in. We're studying J.C. Ryle's commentary on Mark, and to get into all of that, and we'll cover some of it, but to get into all of that would kind of take us away from the main point of what this is about. This is the start of what's known as the Olivet Discourse, given on the Mount of Olives, just east of the Temple Mount. And Jesus makes several predictions about the coming destruction of the temple, the rise of false messiahs, wars, earthquakes, famine. And this has been used by Christians and by skeptics alike to prove their point. The skeptics say, well, it's a little further on, when Jesus says, this generation will not pass away until all this has been accomplished. They're saying, see, he thought he was going to come back in the generation. He didn't. We can't believe anything he says. Christians are saying he predicted the destruction of the temple, which was unthinkable. And it came to pass within a generation. So it's really, really a whole lot of stuff, good stuff. But we're going to be just sticking with a few points, and we will touch on some of that. But before we get into chapter 13, we need to get some context. It's been so long, but even if it's only been a week, kind of backing up to Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 38. Jesus had been teaching in the temple, and he didn't have good things to say about the scribes and the Pharisees. So starting in verse 38 of chapter 12, and in his teaching he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces. They have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts, who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." And he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money in the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which made a penny. And he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty, and has put in everything she had, all she has to live on." Now this is significant. Crucified very shortly. And from this point forward, what little time he has, he's He's through with his public ministry. He's ministering just to his disciples. So going back to 13, and as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." It's just unthinkable that this would happen. The temple was such a magnificent place. It had been the center of worship for probably 1,000 years or more. It had been greatly expanded under Herod. This is a temple that was rebuilt under Zerubbabel in Ezra. And Herod, kind of to placate the Jews, he had greatly expanded it beyond its original size. Some of the stones, they specifically mentioned stones as big as 50 feet wide, 25 feet high, and 16 feet deep. How that was done. I mean, we talk about the pyramids. The difference is the pyramids are still there. The temple is completely gone. The disciples, they were very fascinated by that. But Jesus had just been teaching about the pretense of the scribes and the Pharisees. You flip over to Matthew chapter 23. He talks about the Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Jesus called them out for focusing on the outward appearance and neglecting God's word. We saw earlier in Mark how some had rejected God's word to honor your father and mother by saying, sorry, Mom and Dad, my wealth, my resources, they are korban, or they are committed to the temple. I can't help you because I'm so spiritual. I'm such a great guy. I've committed this to the temple. And finally, what God had clearly told them to be, that was a tradition. That was not anything in Scripture. Now the temple is I actually looked up online one time. I wanted to see a visual of the temple, and I stumbled upon this place that's some kind of cult in Brazil. They have rebuilt it. They've made it was like a train wreck. You don't want to look. They've actually made an Ark of the Covenant and have guys dressed up. I mean, it's very, very bizarre. I just wanted to see the building. But the complex, it said, was measured about 500 yards by 300. I was trying to get some perspective on that, and I looked up how large was the Great Pyramid of Giza. Area-wise, you could fit 3 within the temple complex. It was massive. Enormous stones, covered, Josephus tells us it was covered in plates of gold and marble that was so white strangers would think that snow had fallen on it, blinding in the sun. And Jesus, in teaching on the Mount of Olives, the temple would be over here. It's elevated, then there's the Valley of Kidron, and the Mount of Olives up here. And a beautiful view from there of the temple. And Jesus saying that not one stone is going to be left upon another was just stunning. But as you can imagine the pride of that. I mean, I feel, I think the closest thing you can compare it to today are like the cathedrals of Europe, and even in the Holy Land, and in shrines and things like that. I would love to see those. I never have. About almost 20 years ago, I was in Washington, D.C. for the inauguration, and the Capitol building, now it's not a religious center, except for maybe the people who worship themselves that work there, but I mean, seeing that, it's just beautiful. You feel proud of that. If you're ever there, look up. It's stunning. So I can understand that, but the focus had become so much on the outward appearance, and the temple really was a good a metaphor for the people. It was all about show. It was all about the external, but there was nothing happening inside that was pleasing to God. Do we do that today? The first point that Ryle makes is the true glory of a church does not consist in its buildings for public worship, but in the faith and godliness of its members. Now, our natural tendency is to focus on the outward appearance. If I dress up on Sunday, God is more pleased with me. A tie, that's even better. A blazer, a bow tie would be better still. You get the vest. That it's just. We don't actually do that, but we do think that God is going to be more pleased with us if I do this or that. But is Jesus impressed by the buildings? Not at all. And rather than joining in the admiration, he tells his followers that will be destroyed. And he also said he's greater than the temple. So in AD 70, the temple was destroyed by the Romans. It was so complete that the archaeologists today, they have a difficult time even knowing exactly where it was. But tradition is that the Dome of the Rock was on the original site, but I guess that's not even certain. It's said that Titus, the Roman general who was leading the siege, first they surrounded the city, starved them out, and a fire in the temple caused the gold to melt. And to retrieve that gold, he had his soldiers move every stone to get to the gold. The temple, well, what was the temple? What did it really represent? Start asking some questions here. Or the sacrifices, what did all the sacrifices point to? The temple was there for the sacrifice.
The point is towards Christ.
Exactly.
The sacrifices.
Yeah, the temple, it represented the promise of redemption. And Christ was redemption accomplished. But what did it become to the religious leaders?
A place of power, where they could make their rules for man and
Showtime.
It was also a place where they made money because they had tax, and so you couldn't pay with the money from the world. You had to exchange your money, which
exactly.
They made money
the
on
temple shekel
currency exchange, and of course people bring a sacrificial lamb or whatever, and of course they had to pass the approval by the priest. The priest would say, no, it wasn't good enough, so you need one of ours over here. So they were, which is $14.99.
That's right.
Yeah, this one.
But
wait.
You think again about the sheer size of it. Bob preached recently about after the day of Pentecost. How many saved when Peter and John preached? Another 5,000?
Another 5,000, but 3,000 on the day of Pentecost and 5,000 later.
And that probably wasn't everybody who was there. It's the sheer size. Heath and I know Heath, you read the book Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. It is fascinating about, he's an atheist, but he's fascinated with cathedrals. And in his story, one of the characters, his mother has died without the last rites and he is haunted that she's in purgatory. So he decides he has to build a cathedral to please God. He breaks every commandment there is so that he can build the cathedral. He kills people, he burns villages, he steals them, he takes wives from their husbands, so he can build a cathedral which will please God enough to get his mom out of purgatory. How is it? That's a fictional character, but it describes pretty well what people do. So I'd say that the temple had become an idol. And anything, even good things, can be idols in our lives if it takes our focus, takes our attention away from the finished work of Christ, or adds anything to that. So what is God interested in? I happen to have a scripture here. 1 Samuel 16:7. When Samuel was going to the sons of Jesse. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. So, going back to verse 3, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to be accomplished?" Peter, James, and John wanted to know two things. When's this going to happen? And how are we going to know? What is the sign? I find it remarkable that they didn't object to the idea of the temple being destroyed. I mean, this is the same Peter that when Jesus said he was going to be arrested and killed, no, this will not happen to you. We won't let this happen to you. That's just kind of an aside. But it was, it really was unthinkable, and I expect they probably wanted a specific answer. It will happen at this time. But Jesus warns them. And Jesus began to say to them, "See that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray." There were many false messiahs after Jesus' death. Still have false messiahs. They would gain a following, generate excitement, and then be crushed or just fade away. Remember, I think, Bob, you pronounce this differently. Gamaliel, Paul's mentor. Gamaliel. When the disciples were before the council, his wise counsel was, look, if this is not of God, it's going to die on its own. But if it is, there's nothing we can do to stop it. There was one in a big revolt in AD 32, a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba. He gained a following, and the people proclaimed him to be Messiah. And he didn't say, "No, I'm not." He accepted it. But Jesus, what is he warning his disciples of? They want to know when it's going to happen. He's warning them about false teachers, false Messiah, false doctrine. And be alert. Don't be led astray. And that applies to us today. A lot of, talking about the prophecy and stuff in here, we tend to read that stuff as it was written for us. But, and certainly there are things that apply to us. But he was talking to his people of that day. So, but that's kind of getting ahead. We still see false messiahs today. What do you say? Yeah. What examples come to mind? Yeah, there's one. He claimed to be Christ, didn't he? David Koresh. There's Oh, there was a cult, bald-headed guy named Doe. He led everybody in mass suicide. And those are the things that come to mind. But to false teachers, that really need to be a person claiming to be Christ. I mean, I think Jesus was talking about people claiming to be the Messiah at that time. But how many other things, false teaching in the church?
Isn't it amazing how false teaching grabs hold of so many people? Mm-hmm. It's like false teachers that wrongs people around them.
And it could be just any kind of, it could be a secular philosophy. And again, I think Jesus was talking specifically about people claiming to be the Messiah. But there are so many things that, one, they can become an idol in that they draw our attention away from the finished work of Christ. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this to be accepted. Just all sorts of things that go on today. A lot of like self-improvement. You can have your best life now and all that kind of thing. So, but then in going on into verse 7, Jesus warns, and when you hear wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. These are but the beginning of birth pains. And again, immediately, pretty soon after Jesus' death, a lot of things happened. Pompeii, that happened around the same time. But are these, we call these signs of the times. Jesus says, is that what he says they are? This must take place, but the end is not yet. And yet we tend to look at it as like, it's coming. Well, it is coming. But we can't really say that this earthquake or hurricane or any natural disaster or anything is an indication that God is coming. When I was growing up, everybody had a copy of the late great Planet Earth, and that was gospel. But what does Jesus' followers say about that? I think they're still expecting an earthly kingdom. Many of the people following expecting an overthrow of the Romans and an earthly kingdom, and that things are going to just really get better. It's going to be a paradise on earth. Is Jesus saying that to his disciples? He's saying, be ready. Trying to prepare them for the difficulty that will be coming. Our tendency today is to think that things will improve, and there are things we can do to make life easier, to make life better. But as long as sin reigns, as long as Satan is unbound, there's going to be all manner of calamity. Think that as more people come to Christ, the world will be improve. Everybody will get better. They'll be, as all these people come to Christ, and the ambition, the desire of every Miss America contestant will come through world peace. But that's not going to happen until Christ returns. There's a great quote from Winston Churchill during the war. He said, this is not the end, this is not even the beginning of the end, but it may be the end of the beginning. That's just kind of an aside. But the danger, one of the dangers of some of the dispensational teaching is that we become so focused on when the return is and reading the signs and what does this mean? What does that mean? That we neglect, just like the people who worship the temple rather than the God who gave it to them. We neglect the things that we should be doing. I wanted to mention also, I mentioned this at the beginning, there's a great website called Grace Gems. It's Puritan teaching, and Ryle is on there. You can read and look at some of this stuff. And also, if you're interested in the prophecy of Mark 13 and a reformed view on that, The Last Days According to Jesus, that's also available. I think it's an 11 or 12-part video series online. If you put in The Last Days According to Jesus, click on it. There are free resources. The book takes a really deep dive into all of it, but it's an excellent overview there if you're interested in that. Any questions or comments? I mean, I know there's a lot in here. We're going to be getting into the statement by Jesus, this generation will not pass away until all these things have been accomplished, which has caused a lot of confusion, because what things is he talking about? But that comes a little bit later. And like I say, it's hard to kind of stay away from some of that stuff. But as far as the main point of what we're doing,
It's important, Blair, that you connect the dots where he's teaching at the beginning of that chapter, your section you're talking about. What he's going to say in a few minutes, he said, when you see these things start to happen, get out of town.
Exactly.
And literally run for your life. And because of that, Christians who had been grounded in the teaching of Jesus with the disciples were saved from a lot of destruction, destruction of Jerusalem. They actually saved their lives because that was taught. When you see these things start to happen, get out of town. Flee the mountains, he said. But I think that what you're covering today is that there's a time to take off, and not quite yet, because you're going to see all these things happen.
Exactly.
Otherwise, people get freaked out and start taking off too soon.
Yeah, and
Go to the mountains of Tennessee.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're having a COVID outbreak there. You don't want to go there.
And traditionally, the thing to do would be to flee to Jerusalem, to the walled city. We'll be safe there.
Yeah. So,
And Jesus told them to do exactly the opposite. Well, any other thoughts? Heath, you've studied this.
let's put him on the spot there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that could be said. You kind of touched on one thing I always find interesting is people will come and ask Jesus questions, right? And he rarely gives them any kind of answer that they're looking for, right? And so they're like, when's this going to happen? He never answers that. What will the signs be? Well, so far he's saying what are not signs.
Exactly.
You're going to hear this, you're going to hear this, you're going to hear that, you're going to hear this other thing, and these are not signs.
But he does give them later, when you see the...
He does give a sign in verse 14 when you see the abomination of desolation.
Yeah.
Okay, but even that's kind of enigmatic, what we're talking about there. And then later on, when he's talking about the second coming in verse 24 and after, he's talking about these astrological signs. So, there are a couple of signs he mentions, but those signs are either kind of not very clear.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples of that is in Jesus answering contrary to what they... And it makes sense once you look into it, is when the 70 returned, and they're just saying, it was amazing. Even the demons obeyed. And Jesus goes, I saw Satan fall like lightning. At first reading, it's like, I said even the demons, obey. Jesus is saying, I was there when he fell from heaven. Even looking ahead to the cross, I saw him fall when it had been accomplished. I'm greater. I'm so much greater than what he is. And it's not like he's not answering their question, but he's telling what they need.
Always trying to bring it back to what the focus is.
Yeah.
And it always strikes me also that they can't understand. And I think John himself in his gospel says, and the truth was catch from them so that they couldn't understand it, right?
Right.
And so he's told them he's going to die and everything. And he's saying here in verse 6, many will come in my name saying, I am he. And they must have been thinking, how is anybody going to come and say you're you because you're going to be here?
We know you.
Right here.
We'll know the difference.
So even in this, he's hinting that he's not going to be around, but the truth was hidden from them. They couldn't understand that he was going to die.
And as this opens, as they're coming out of the temple, Jesus is, taking it to the scribes and the Pharisees. And the first thing they say is, look at how beautiful that place is. Did you miss what? And it's easy to be hard on the disciples in hindsight.
Yeah.
With things like that. But, I was just talking about focusing on the outward appearance at the expense of your own soul, and you're pointing out how beautiful the building is. It's a building. It was sad to see what happened with Notre Dame. You got to see that when you were in France, didn't you? It's beautiful. I'd love to see that one day, but a part of me said, it's just a building. And it didn't get struck down. So, it's very beautiful. I would love to visit some of the cathedrals and things in Europe, but I'd see it more as art than a shrine or anything.
And so do they.
Yeah.
Europeans. I was lucky enough to spend about 6 weeks in France in the early 90s. And that was one of the takeaways I had was when you go to any town, they have a huge cathedral. But nobody's there.
Yeah.
And it's just that their society has gone so far away from God.
I believe in London now there are more mosques than churches.
That's probably true. I don't know.
There are mosques that have taken over abandoned churches.
Yeah. There was a Christian singer in the 80s. I remember a song. I can't remember his name, but he had a song called "This Disco Used to Be a Cute Cathedral," about buildings that were, churches and were just repurposed for nightclubs or things like
The
that.
other thing I take away was when you go into one of those cathedrals, because they're so huge and stone, how cold they were.
Oh yeah.
It's just amazing. You feel it when you just walk in and chill.
We did get to visit St. Patrick's, which is impressive, and I don't think it really comes close to some of the biggies. But the thing that fascinated me is there was a couple being married up in the front.
Yeah.
And people are walking around, taking pictures,
Attraction more than
things just go
church
on.
life.
And there's no, we're having a wedding, you can't come in here. People are just milling all about. It was fascinating.
Well, the other thing I'd like to mention is the takeaway that for myself is that all this is saying one thing, and that is that we are to live our lives as if it's our last. And that sounds kind of flippant, but if we really honestly take that to what it means is to live the day as our last, we would certainly be living our lives
Could happen
better.
at any time.
But the other thing is how the sovereignty of God ended up writing these things. How that, if you take it from that standpoint, how much more those things make you even more live your life as a last thing. Because it's written in such a way that there's going to be rumors, you know, well,
Yeah.
you can take any time in history and say, okay, there it is.
Yeah, there are many examples of people who have just not been real serious about their faith, if they had faith, and then they get a diagnosis, a terminal diagnosis or something very serious,
Yeah.
and it just,
Absolutely.
brings them, okay, everything is focused now on, what's going to happen, and they do things that I think what you're saying, we should be like that all the time.
Yeah,
Whether we have,
and we don't.
That-
I mean, I sort of don't, but it's, if you just thought about that, and how you should focus.
what would you do different if you
Yeah,
knew this was the
exactly.
last day?
Yeah.
Psalm 91
Yeah. There you go. Psalm 91.
teaches us to number our days.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you kind of answered my question, actually. I was going to say, because it says here, no one knows that the day or hour. No one.
Yeah.
So does that mean we really don't need to spend a lot of time speculating?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Instead, to
No one knows.
just live as,
The one thing you can know is somebody who says they do know, you can be sure that's not it.
Right.
They don't.
Yeah, that's the other,
That's
that's the
one
other side, the good part of the equation.
There was somebody in the 80s said they gave all these reasons why the world was going to come to an end, and people were mocking them. I was in the car, and this radio station was playing "It's the End of the World as You Know It" by
Yeah.
R.E.M.
Yeah.
And of course, nothing happened. But that guy's probably still got his following. He probably came up with some.
Yeah. It was a mathematical error, and it reformulated it. It's now
Yeah.
just another date out in the future.
Yeah. Well, all right. We'll look forward to next week, and I think next week, and then we're going to be going back into the Catechism, Westminster Catechism. So we'll get through, Mark.
Sorry, Mark, just coming and going. Normally we would have had things, the second quarter and fourth quarter of the year, but then
Yeah.
taking on scriptural references and went through scripture. Last year, this past year, the second quarter was messed up because of COVID, and then we kind of had a desire to teach on what he did, so the second quarter, the fourth quarter was going to change. So,
All right.
we make our plans, the Lord has his final say, right?
That's right.
Absolutely.